Hello, and welcome to Culture Conversations, the podcast where we explore the people side of work. I'm your host, Megan Robinson. For years, I've found myself deep in discussions about workplace engagement with industry experts. Now I get to share this wisdom with all leaders, new and experienced, on their journeys to build cultures that maximize potential. We spend so much of our lives at work. Let's make it a place where our teams can grow and succeed. Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. I am Megan Robinson and I am so excited and thrilled to have a conversation with the incredible Erich Kurschat. He is an absolutely amazing facilitator, trainer, coach, savant of all things HR, I'm going to say. Erich Kurschat is the owner of A Harmony Insights. He is a company that helps companies and consultants really build those high-performing teams and revenue streams around everything DISC and the 5 behavioral assessments. But how we really met originally was through HR Hotseat, because he is also the founder of HR Hotseat, which is an inclusive mastermind community of real HR pros solving real HR problems. He really draws from a broad range of experiences as a corporate HR professional, a public speaker, a classical musician, and a proud introvert to inspire others to work through meaningful work, productive workplace relationships. Man, Erich, I am so excited to talk today about culture, about communications, about some different strategies for people. You are truly one of the first people I met when really understanding, exploring this HR space, and such a wealth of knowledge, such a community builder, such an incredible communicator. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I think you gave me some words that I need to add to my LinkedIn profile.
I have a feeling you're just fine on your LinkedIn profile as is. So many people I go to introduce Erich and they're like, oh, of course I know Erich already.
Funny for an introvert,
don't,
by the way. Like the fact that people would know me means I have to put myself out there. That's taken some work.
It's very intentional work. And I think an introvert that works so hard on that has so much more comfortability with the people that they do connect with, because they're so intentional about it. They're so thoughtful about the way they put themselves out there that it is so much easier for other people to connect.
Yeah, well, that's my hope. We'll see what happens.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Today, I really want to dive into communication, how it shapes culture, understanding more of how we're communicating and what that looks like so that we can bring the same type of intentionality that Erich does to our workplaces. So Erich, I just want to tee it up and hear some of your brilliance. Tell me more about the types of model you use to help teams communicate more effectively, productively with their stakeholders.
Well, initially it was just crossing my fingers and hoping that what I was saying was being heard in the way that I meant for it to be heard. That was my model. Is finger crossing a model? Because that was the...
It's an emoji, I
think, but... And it turns out that that wasn't working. I think it's George Bernard Shaw said something like the great, I'm paraphrasing, something like the greatest mistake in communication is assuming that it has taken place. And I was assuming that it was taking place. And having been a psychology major and an HR pro at the time, learning about the DISC assessment rocked my world. I mean, it was like, it opened up my eyes to what effective, productive communication could really be like. And so for the past 17 or 18 years, that is the model that I have used, is the DISC model of human behavior and human communication.
Well, I'm a huge fan of it myself, but I want to define a little bit closer. You said productive communication.
Yeah.
How do you define productive versus non-productive communication?
Oh, I love that. Great question. And knowing your DISC style, it's no surprise to me that you would value productive communication. You know, so productive communication is probably what it sounds like. Can we get things done together in the workplace? You know, and you could think about, I suppose, productive communication in your personal lives as well. If, you know, you're trying to get to a movie with a friend or have a house full of dinner guests, you know, that communication becomes important in order to produce whatever outcome you have in mind. Certainly with the workplace, though, if we're getting together and we're working together on a project, I want to ensure that I'm able to contribute something to this relationship that allows us to get to wherever we need to be at the end of the day. And it could be something as simple as, a 30-minute meeting where we come out of it with some deliverables. It could be a goal 6 months from now that we need to have accomplished X, Y, and Z, within the next 6 months. If our communication is such that we're just circling around each other and misunderstanding one another and, having to return time and time again to the same action items, that's not going to get us where we need to be as quickly. And I would argue as meaningfully. And that meaningful connection is something that's a through line across so much of what I do.
I love that. And when I think about when I'm talking about communication, it's that meaning and that intent behind it. So much of just what you meant to communicate is actually what gets communicated. And that's
Yeah.
where those misunderstandings, and if it's not productive, it's essentially not happening. That, like the quote that you mentioned earlier, which is totally a quote I use all the time. It's my favorite because you have that assumption.
And that is the assumption is that, well, not only that it's taken place, but I would say that very naturally I show up to a conversation with you just assuming that you value what I value. That you want to be treated in all ways, in all ways the way that I do, and that you're motivated by the same things and you fear the same things. And it's not until you realize that different people have different tendencies and preferences in the workplace in terms of how they do their best work and how they communicate meaningfully and productively with one another. That's the point at which you really learn to communicate or lead or sell or influence, fill in the blank however you want, so much more effectively than you have previously.
So how do you get to that clarity?
I think first you need to understand that it's possible. That people have to understand that, wait a minute, I may have my entire life been taking a cookie cutter approach to how I communicate with other people. I show up if I'm detail oriented and focused on tasks, assuming that you are those things as well. Or that if I love feelings and emotions and people and morale and whether or not people are happy at work, that that's what you value as well. And a certain percentage of the population will, but a greater percentage of the population will not value those things. Doesn't mean that they can't do them or that they don't understand the benefit of those things, but they show up speaking a different language. So I think it starts with an understanding that we're very diverse in everything that we bring to the workplace, including communication preferences. Number two, I think that then it involves a natural curiosity. I need to naturally want to know you and care to know you and be motivated in some way um, to better understand what makes you tick. And without that curiosity, I don't know that there's much hope for somebody to become a better communicator. You can still maybe learn the tips and tricks, but it may come across as kind of transactional, and robotic. If I truly care and I'm truly curious about what makes you tick, what you need from me, and how we can communicate more productively together, I think we can come to a point of greater understanding.
So the self-centeredness is what's really getting in the way of a lot of effective communication.
Yeah, potentially. And I don't even want in saying that, it almost sounds like someone's to blame. And I don't think we are. I think just naturally we are jazzed up about what we like and what we do, and you and I know each other well enough for you to know that I sing classically. If you were to tell me that you sing, like, forget about asking you questions. I'm going to tell you everything I've ever done because I'm so excited to share those things, with you. What I want to encourage people to do is get to a place where they recognize that showing curiosity and demonstrating an interest in other people and what they bring to the table and how that cognitive diversity, which we can get into, really benefits a team and an organization and an entire culture, that is where innovation happens and organizations thrive.
Without that communication, you really can't have productive or effective cultures. You just
Yeah,
have a band of individuals running around doing their own thing, fighting against each other, squabbling, every person fending for themselves.
and I
And
like how you set it up too. You said wouldn't have, I think, sort of an effective, productive culture. You didn't say wouldn't have a culture. And given the work that you do, I know you appreciate that there are some companies that say, well, we don't have a culture in place. We need to establish a culture. And the immediate response is you have one in place whether or not you know about it or have been intentional.
Yeah.
about it. So what can we do to be intentional about the culture that you are building or evolving such that it's taking you in a positive direction and not working against your efforts?
Well, and I love kind of combining that assumption because I look at culture by default or the things that are happening automatically without having any of that intention. And the same way it's really happening with that communication, right? There's kind of this default, there's an assumption of what I think is happening is what everyone else is doing. And without that clarity, without that intentionality, without actually communicating what it is that you want, it just continues to either fester and bubble between the surface a little bit of
Yeah.
what's actually happening. And it's that invisible force that's affecting productivity or affecting the team. It could be positive. There's definitely, I'll say, even if you think it's positive and you think everything's great, I've seen a lot of organizations that are just being nice to each other in
Yeah.
uh, in a totally dysfunctional way just as much.
I've spoken
It
with
feels
clients
better.
I've spoken with clients recently that say there's a toxic positivity here. It's like we communicate, but we don't address conflict. We don't hold each other accountable to the commitments we make. Well, that's not a culture that I necessarily want to be a part of then. I mean, sure, you may compliment me on whatever sweater I have on, but like that's that is not going to push us to be as good as we can be otherwise. And you mentioned something I like thinking in terms of analogies and making comparisons. It's not just enough to be intentional, but you have to be intentional in the right way with these things. So for example, I could tell you to enhance culture in my organization, I have made the intentional decision to bring in a ping pong table. So that's kind of the cliche now for building culture, right? Is that as long as you have a ping pong table, things are okay. In terms of communication, I could tell you I'm being intentional because we're lacking in communication. We need to just have more of it. So our 30-minute meetings are now 60 minutes, right? That's intentional on my part, but that's not necessarily a step in the right direction. So number one is intentionality, but two, making sure that you're being intentional about the right things.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, you it sounds like a really great way to justify a ping pong table. Um, right, justification is that
It does.
intentionality.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm sure it can be, I'm sure that can be, I'm sure it can be defended. Yeah.
I've definitely seen a lot of, I think, challenges, particularly with leaders and teams, where you'll see leadership who is a very assertive, very bold, very clear, very direct style or expectation, even of their teams. And I've seen some cultures around that where they struggle because other people aren't rising up to those
Mhm.
expectations. I'll say I'm working with an organization that the C-suite is frustrated by all of their team members because they're not rising up to that next level of leadership. Then maybe they don't know what it looks like, but at the same time, they're not providing any of that feedback. They just kind of want to see everyone magically become SVPs, and they're not pushing back on what that means or what that looks like, which I find so fascinating, kind of in that communication style, but also in that culture effects where they're almost split between the two.
hmm You said something important, which is, I don't think you used this word, but behaviors. What does this look like? It's one thing to talk about a culture of feedback or a culture of trust or fill in the blank. I feel like every day you're reading a different headline about what culture you should have. And that's all fine and good to talk about it conceptually, but unless people have an understanding of what behaviors are associated, with those cultures, I think they're at a loss. And then you also mentioned that that the sort of implied perhaps that the culture is set by leadership. And if leadership values productivity, for example, quick decision making and confidence and thinking on your feet at that sort of thing, then that is something that's going to be valued in other people. And if folks don't bring that, then they can be seen as not participating or contributing in some way to this culture. So part of the conversation that I want to have with folks is saying, those things may be valuable. Being productive at the end of the day, yes, you have to get things done. You have to be united around a common vision. But in addition to that, are you also cognizant of the cognitive diversity and the spice that your team is bringing? So maybe you have somebody who kind of struggles when it comes to the achievement side of things, but they're bringing something else to the table, into the culture, some amount of spice that is so valuable when we start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from a talent acquisition perspective, you hear so much about hiring for culture fit, instead of saying, well, what if we put culture fit aside, hire for values fit, and bring people in that are going to add spice to the culture that's already in place here? That yes, leadership may value getting things done and achievement and, or whatever they value. And to certain some extent, you want others to value those things as well, but we can't disregard or ignore or what's the word I want to say, sort of downplay the fact that we have team members showing up that value something different entirely, and those things are just as important to the culture that we're building here as anything that the leadership is going to espouse.
What advice or what recommendations would you have for that person that doesn't feel like they're able to really perform in the way that their boss or manager or leader it has those different values or has those different, I'm going to say expectations?
Yeah. I think it's two parts. I think any relationship is a dance of sorts, and there are two people involved, and so no one person in that relationship can set the full tone for what's expected. So I think each person plays a role. For the person themselves who doesn't feel that they are measuring up isn't the right way to put it, but that they are showing up with
Aligning.
consistent, aligned. What did you say? Aligning?
I say alignment.
Yeah, an
There's
alignment
kind
to
of that
those values.
misalignment.
Yeah. It's really, for the first step is always just opening up lines of communication to begin with. And unfortunately, that's where many organizations struggle. It's like, forget about steps 2, 3, and 4. We don't even have, we're not setting a tone for or have a culture of open dialogue. You tell me that you have open office hours and that you're open to anything that I would have to tell you, but when I walk in, you're on the other side of a desk with your arms crossed. Like that nonverbal communication tells me everything I need to know about whether or not you're receptive to my input, So we have to start with that open dialogue to begin with. And I think in this case, it may start with the person who doubts that alignment showing up to their boss and saying, I need to talk through something. I feel like I'm bringing something different to this team, um, either than what may be expected of me or than what is being rewarded, in this organization. I speak a slightly different language. It doesn't mean that I don't value yours, but I need to have a better understanding of what you're asking for from me and be honest with you to let you know that that may not come naturally. I understand you want me to make quick decisions. I'm wired to think through the details till the cows come home. So, I'm not using that as a crutch, but as a way to tell you, I want to make the decisions you want me to make, but I may have a different path to get there than you might expect or that comes naturally to you, and I want to know if that's okay. And if it is, fantastic. I want to work with that. If it isn't, it's possible that this isn't the right fit for me. I step into so many different disc workshops and I almost run the risk of sticking my foot in my mouth by telling the learners in the room, if you ever feel that you're in a position that is not right for you and your supervisors aren't hearing you when you communicate to them, it's possible that this isn't the right fit. The best and the most progressive and forward thinking and innovative organizations out there don't put Megan Robinson in a role and keep you there, for eternity. They keep coming back to you and saying, is this a good fit? Is this as much a good fit today as it was yesterday? And keep those lines of communication and dialogue open so that you always have the opportunity to communicate if you need a different resource or if it's just no longer a fit or an alignment in the way that we had originally hoped.
That's some bold questions for someone to be asking. Definitely that's a lot of vulnerability and risk.
Yeah.
It's very tough, but I have found that having those open dialogues, having those conversations, being willing to ask some of those tough questions very rarely is looked at negatively. When you do
Yeah.
it with a delicate hand, when you do it with a lot of tact, when you do it with that authentic curiosity and openness of, hey, I want this to work. Here's what I'm noticing. Can we
Yeah.
overcome this?
Yeah.
Am I willing to overcome it? Are you willing to budge a little bit and be okay with that?
I
What are
think
the
if people,
non-negotiables?
if people, whether at work or at home, really understand that you care, that's such a strong beginning. Um, And I can't help but make analogies to our personal lives as well. And you can think of personal relationships. If you just show up to your partner and say, no, sorry, this isn't working. You need to change. You know? Like that's not going to get you very far at all. But if you say, like, I really care about this relationship, I care about you, I care about our future together, I want to make this work. How can we do that as a couple?
Would you
Now
please
you
just
have,
do the dishes?
yeah, yeah. I said please. Same in the workplace. Same in the workplace. I want this to work, but I need to let you know that my communication style is a little bit different from yours, and I feel like that's caused some conflict. I want to be able to talk about this. Unfortunately, that type of vulnerability also, I think, requires a certain level of trust. And that's the big T word, that we like to use in these conversations. And without that trust, and that you're always building it, but without that trust, a lot of these conversations with individuals and teams become harder to have.
And I love that underpinning of trust. It's funny, it just came up last week aggressively as we were talking about some culture building and intentionality with leadership, and having that strong foundation of trust is so crucial for that. And without it, as you just pointed out, communication is just going to suffer. Everything will suffer: productivity, teamwork. I know we just touched on DISC. Go ahead.
Yeah. In the work that I do, you asked about the model. DISC is one of the models, the one that I use primarily. So that's establishing effective, productive communication as a foundation, understanding your natural preferences and tendencies as a contributor at any level to the organization. I'm also an authorized partner for the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, which is content between Patrick Lencioni, based on his 5 dysfunctions book, and Wiley, who's the publisher of Everything DISC. So we can layer onto this foundation of effective communication with the 5 behaviors model, which talks in terms of building trust, managing and navigating productive conflict, making commitments to one another, holding each other accountable to those commitments, and then driving results ultimately. So it's anything but an overnight conversation. This is something that takes years, to really evolve through, but it's so worth the effort.
Thank you so much for your time today, Eric. We're just a wealth of knowledge per usual. And I love that tie-in between the two, because there is really important work that you're doing with organizations, with teams, the resources that you have available. I've personally used and am a huge fan of, and I've seen the transformation on communication, on teams, on cultures. The impact that it gets for a whole organization is really profound. Is
I
there anything
appreciate
else
that.
that you wanted to share?
Um, I mean, only inspire people to think differently about the work they do and the relationships they enter into, regardless of the model you choose or the relationships you have, the people that you trust. Build that community or find that community of folks who really want the best for you and will challenge you to step outside of your comfort zone on occasion, see what that feels like, and really get to a place where you're communicating more meaningfully and productively with others.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for listening. All of Eric Kurschat's details will be in the show notes. If you have any questions about DISC or 5 behaviors, please reach out to him. He is truly an incredible resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Culture Conversations. I'm your host, Megan Robinson, founder of eLeader Experience, a professional leadership development company. Today, we shared actionable ideas to navigate the evolving workplace landscape, compete for talent, and build cultures that maximize potential. If you're looking to learn more about how to support your organization's leaders, you can learn more about our work at eleaderexperience.com. Now get out there and contribute positively to your organization's culture with your own conversations.